And she goes, 3, 2, and punches me on 2. Obviously, I should have known better not to fall for that old trick. But yeah, she was punching me really hard, and she was like, oh, that's nothing, I can punch you way hard. And I thought, is that a threat or is that just a bragging rights, you know?
Bring your imagination to life with inspiring stories of an incredible and very real world.
Hi, I'm Suzy from Suzy Stories, and today I wanted to tell a story about how my couchsurfing host punched me. It sounds a lot more dramatic than it really was, and actually I'm totally fine, it's not a problem. Don't worry, don't call the police. But I just find it funny to scare people with the introduction, because that's sort of the end of the story. But yeah, let me get into it now. This was about just over 3 years ago now, and I had gone travelling. I was going through Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Southeast Asia, like the really typical backpacker destinations, and I was about in my 3rd week of this whole 6-month trip, and I'd not long arrived in Auckland, New Zealand, New Zealand's biggest city, and I'd been playing around with the idea of couchsurfing beforehand. I'd even met up with a girl who was a couchsurfing host, but unfortunately couldn't host me, about a week before in Melbourne. But it was only until I got to Auckland where I'd actually be staying with someone for the first time, which I was quite excited for. I mean, I'd used Airbnb before. I thought it would be somewhat similar in a way, obviously just a more informal version, because you're not paying them necessarily. But I was excited. I was looking forward to trying something new, especially when I was a solo traveller at the time, so it meant a good chance to get to talk to some people where I'd spent a lot of time previously by myself. And obviously staying in dorm rooms, it's nice to have a change and to stay in like a home, and I was looking forward to that like homey vibe. And obviously I'm just in a constant attempt to save a tiny bit of cash here and there. I looked into it as an option and thought, yes, this is perfect. I don't have to pay anything. They get the benefit of me either helping out or whatever they want. I was happy to indulge my host in a bit of cleaning or whatever might be useful. But yeah, let me get into my first and only couchsurfing experience. You'll see why very shortly. Auckland is particularly an expensive city to stay in as a backpacker. There's a lot of hostels available, but I stayed in one the first night I got there, and I was there for 4 nights, so I'd originally earmarked the remaining 3 to stay with my couchsurfing host, which I was pretty happy about, like saving, I think it's around at least 30 New Zealand dollars a night, which is maybe £15 roughly, a night on accommodation. I thought that could go somewhere better spent, whatever, you know. And it also meant that I could see a little bit more of the city that was a little bit outside of the centre, because it's so easy to just stay in a city centre, the central business district in Auckland, and just never leave. But I really wanted to see some of the suburbs, seeing as I was there for 4 days, which a lot of people who are backpacking through New Zealand don't even bother with too much in the city centre, so I needed to try and get out there a bit more. And it also meant that because it's a large city, there were more options for couchsurfing hosts. I looked around at various different cities in Australia and New Zealand for couchsurfing hosts, but I mean, some cities like Wellington had a few, but places like Christchurch just didn't have almost anybody. They were much more geared towards woofing, which was something I also looked into. Similar kind of concept, except you are expected to sort of pay your board, if that makes sense, through work. And that was something I was going to be doing later on when I was on the South Island. But while I was in the big old city, couchsurfing was the way to go to meet my needs. Now, I think couchsurfing can have a bit of a reputation, not necessarily a good one always. I think a lot of people have some amazing experiences, but some people, particularly solo female travellers, have noticed that there's a few creepers on there who maybe message you unsolicited messages, not necessarily being overtly forward or anything, but often they have like a little bit of a strange undertone. I don't know, it's a little tricky. It always depends on people's experience. My experience wasn't so bad. Yes, I had my own set of messages that I maybe were not so keen on, but on the whole I was looking for either women to stay with or for families to stay with, just for that extra element of mind at ease feeling. I think it's sad, but it's true. As a solo female traveller, quite often you focus on your safety primarily, right? So obviously I wasn't going to pick it's all a bit about being a little bit savvy and keeping your wits about you and not thinking that oh, you can have a whole flat to yourself in the centre of the city. All you have to do is come meet me. Just making sure you know that that's probably too good to be true. If it sounds like it's too good to be true, it normally is. I found that when I was backpacking. Normally there's always some kind of catch. You have to buy something or do something else to get what the end offer is. But yeah, so couchsurfing is no different. I think it's always good to just filter through and find the good eggs. And it's easy enough to ignore those people that do make it a little bit awkward. So yeah, I think that's a really good thing to bear in mind with couchsurfing, is a pinch of salt is kind of necessary. But eventually I came across someone who was willing to host me on the days that I was going to be in Auckland, and we appeared to have similar interests, and I think she had a lot of really good reviews. I felt really positive. She looked friendly. Yeah, so I thought perfect, and I messaged her right away and I said, hey, I'm going to be in Auckland on these days. And I like to maybe send a message that, if I can, highlights things that I think would suit us well as a host and a guest, either similar interests or anything really, where we like to visit or things we're looking for out of the experience. And she said yes, so yeah, that was really nice. For the sake of this story and for her anonymity. We don't keep in touch. I would never know what her surname is or anything, but I'm going to call her Jane. Jane isn't her name, but we're going to call her Jane. Well, we'll see how that goes. I'll probably just refer to her as her, because there's not many people in the story, as you might gather very shortly. So yeah, fast forward to maybe a few weeks later when I'd actually arrived at her home in the suburbs of Auckland, and she told me she wasn't going to be in, but someone would be there to let me in, and I didn't really have a problem with that, but what kind of did bother me was I arrived and the door was just wide open, which, I don't know, maybe I was like, oh, is this like a New Zealand thing where they can just leave their doors open and it's fine? I live in London, so it's kind of the exact opposite, where we double lock our door every time you leave. I lock my bedroom door even, to that extent. It's just not the same atmosphere. And I thought, okay, benefit of the doubt, maybe it's just like how it is in this part of the city. Very calm and casual and friendly. And I was like, oh, that must be a good thing. But the people that let me were a little bit more eccentric than me, and I'm quite like straight and narrow. I'm not particularly extroverted either, so I was a little bit like, oh, okay, there are people sitting on the curb outside her house, that's fine. I was a little bit worried I was about to enter some kind of group commune or like a cult or something, just because of, I don't know, you get that weird vibe instantly, and yeah, it put me off maybe. But it was fine. I was like, positive attitude, Suzy, you can do this. Yeah, and to be honest, I wasn't far off in the end with my commune suggestion. But yeah, I was led into the house, but it was only when I really got into the house that I realised, okay, this isn't maybe as comfortable as I was hoping for or expecting. Or maybe I'm just not cut out for couchsurfing. I don't know. There's nothing to benchmark it against. So I thought maybe this is just normal. And of course, my stupidly polite, awkward Britishness persevered and forced me to just grin and bear it, and rather than saying, oh, sorry, no, this maybe isn't for me, and just left, I thought, no, this is fine, squeakiest voice, like, no, it's okay, no, it's great, thanks. Why am I like this? Why are the Brits always like this? We just put up with things that don't make us comfortable, or who knows. The very relaxed Kiwi attitude maybe was not in my favour at this time. But oh well, that's how I ended up with some great stories, so maybe it works out in the end, right? Okay, back to the story. I was going to be staying in the living room, which, couchsurfing says what it is on the tin, right? So that was totally fine with me, except it wasn't, again, like quite what I'd hoped for. How do I put this gently and kindly? Let's just say the living room hadn't seen a vacuum or a bit of bleach in a while, a while. It was, yeah, it wasn't the cleanest. And actually, in preparing to tell this story, I was looking back through the emails that I was sending to my mum when I was away and giving her updates on what I'd been up to, and I found the one around this, and I said to her, in my vague attempt to tell her to make sure she didn't worry or panic about me, and dumb down how like shocked I was at first, and I said it smelled like cats. Which I completely forgot about actually until I read that, so that was quite funny. Luckily she did actually have cats. There were cats living in the house, but the cats were constantly scratching themselves, and I had this fear that they were just flea infested or something, so I did try to avoid them, which was a shame because I love cats, I love animals. I very happily had a little kitty cuddle, but not to be, unfortunately, on this occasion. So yeah, and it wasn't actually a couch that I was ending up sleeping on, but it was this like weird foamy thing on the floor. It kind of was like this brown, I don't know what it was. It was kind of like something you get when you go camping, but it wasn't. And yeah, again, it was fine with me. I didn't really mind where I slept. It was fine to be on the floor, but it was just maybe the idea and the panic of like, oh my god, when were these last cleaned? Am I gonna get some sort of strange skin rash? I don't know. It was just like all thoughts running through my brain at this point. And yeah, so after trying to convince myself like this was going to be fine and try and just like get my bearings with this new situation I was put in, Jane turned up and she came home, and we actually had a chance to finally meet, and she was so lovely. Like really, there's this, although this story is like my couch surfing host punched me, like what an experience. She was really lovely, and it's definitely nothing about her. She's not, nothing wrong with her as a person at all. I think we were just very different people, fundamentally. And despite her loveliness, I very quickly realised that was the case. It was just, I realised that our similar interests that I'd picked up on weren't so similar after all. I had written I'd have an interest in philosophy because I have a degree in philosophy, and it's something I appreciate, talking about deep thoughts and concepts, all that kind of stuff. And she had expressed an interest in philosophy too, which is what I picked up on her profile. But it was definitely more of like the spiritual end of things and like the lifestyle aspects. So that was just my bad at misunderstanding her profile. But oh well, you know, I like interesting people. It was fine by me. And she was a really kind person. I could tell she genuinely wanted to give people good experiences when they were staying in her home. But honestly, quite frankly, her home was just like quite disgusting, which sounds very, 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 very rude, but it really was. Like I've stayed in dodgy hostels before, and I've stayed in places that are questionable enough as it is, but this was just kind of like another level because you weren't given a bed and you weren't paying, so you weren't able to like complain to anyone. It was just like your choice to be there or not. But yeah, besides the hygiene or cleanliness aspect, what kind of made me also quite nervous was just the number of people coming in and out of the house all the time. So like I mentioned, like some random bloke let me into the house, and a girl who'd stayed there who was leaving, she'd also, yeah, I passed by her, we used ships in the night sort of thing, and she seemed really nice, and it kind of made me a little bit uneasy to be like left as the only girl, just because like I say, you get a bit wary about these things, and I was a bit like stressed about leaving my belongings in this place that I didn't feel very familiar or comfortable about. So I'm very, very glad I had a padlock with me. So top tip is always bring padlock. So yeah, I think in the evenings was where I spent most of my, in the evenings I spent most of my time with Jane. The daytime I spent a lot of time just out and about, doing my own thing, sightseeing and whatnot. I purposely tried to spend a lot of time out of the house, so yeah, I think we interacted most in the evenings, and the first night I was there, she invited me to her acrobatics class, and I thought, hey, that sounds really fun. Why not give something new a try, you know? Why not try learn a new skill, gain some world perspective or something, I don't know. And it was a full-blown workout, I have to say. I don't think I've ever been so groped by a stranger before. There's like when I was a kid at ballet class, a lot of people squeezing your tummy and squeezing your bum, and you just feel like you're like, God, why aren't my muscles as strong as they should be? Gosh, this is frustrating. It made me realise how unfit I am, and I would definitely love to try it again, although there were a few like know-it-all people who were like, oh, you're not doing it right, or this is what you should be doing. Fine, fair enough. But I had a really fun evening, and we went for a curry afterwards, and we had met some really nice people. A lot of people were really nice and friendly to me, even though I obviously was only going to be there for one night. And that's exactly what I thought travelling was all about, just getting to know the locals, getting to meet new people, new experiences, trying new things. And this was like the first thing I'd have been trying, you know. I think like I say, I was very early on in my travelling life experience, so this was like my chance to start of get out there and explore new adventures. And I guess acrobatics might not be so adventurous for some, but for me, who typically I like the gym as my activity, so I was like, yeah, this is kind of cool to try something new. The second night, so I was meant to stay there for 3 nights, but I couldn't commit to the 3. In the end, I only stayed 2 because I was so afraid of the bathroom. The shower was like I had this like nightmare of this orangey lump that was sort of catching flies in the shower. It was a bit gross, so I was like not showering there, and I thought maybe 3 days off without showering was a little bit pushing it, even for a backpacker. So I only stayed there 2 nights. But on my second night, this is when things got really kind of weird, and she took me to another class. She said, hey, I'm going to this Russian martial arts class. And I thought, okay, interesting. Might be fun, might be handy to learn some sort of skills as a solo female traveller. Why not put myself out there and learn some self-defence? And I thought, especially if I end up in another weird house where it's not quite as chilled, you never know what could happen. So this sort of form of self-defence is called Sistema. I think that's how you say it, but well, that's how they said it, so I'm going to go with it. And basically it practices a defence over offence sort of practice, where you sort of learn to be on guard rather than fight someone back, so to speak. Well, that's sort of the gist I got from it. I'm not sure if that is completely accurate, but that's how I sort of saw it. I really liked the principles. I thought it was a really cool thing, but honestly, it was such a weird night. I clearly don't get out much because it was just so a bit out there for me. So this art class was taught by an ex-army guy who he was super lovely and was really helpful and informative. But the first few things we did was like we rolled around on the floor, like gripping each other's ankles, and had to crawl our way from one side of the room to the other. And obviously a lot of people knew each other, but I was a complete stranger. So for me, just grabbing the ankle of some 18-year-old kid who's learning martial arts I was a bit, I don't know. It was just strange for me. It was really out of my comfort zone, let's put it that way. But it was okay. It was like team building, exercise. It's all about, I don't know, trying to figure things out logically with your body. I don't know. It seemed to make sense at the time. So then I think we tried a few more exercises, and we got to this sort of near the end of the class where the coach was like, right, so now we're going to learn how to take a punch. And I was like, you what? Come on, seriously, like that seems a bit much. Like, are we just going to start like hitting each other? I don't know. So no, we were really honestly just paired up, and I was obviously with Jane because she was the only other person I knew, and she was sort of my mentor at this point, I suppose you could say. And we were told, brace yourselves to be punched very hard, which she did several times. I was just nervous laughing the whole way through, thinking, okay, what am I meant to do? How does one prepare to be punched? And she was like, you need to tense your stomach, you need to just tighten your muscles, and then I'll punch you. And I was like, okay. And I was like, you're going to give me like a countdown? She was like, yeah, I'll give you a countdown. And she goes 3, 2, and punches me on 2. Obviously, I should have known better not to fall for that old trick. But yeah, she was punching me really hard, and she was like, oh, that's nothing, I can punch you way hard. And I thought, is that a threat or is that just a bragging rights, It was kind of weird. And I totally get the idea. The crazy thing is, at the time, I was like, not even questioning it. I was like, it makes so much sense. You need to learn how to take a punch and understand how it feels, to train yourself to prepare for it and train the right muscles to tense. And I just feel like maybe she got a little bit too much joy out of punching her couchsurfing guests. Because the day before, she'd been bragging to me about how strong she was and how weak I am, and I was honestly kind of scared. I was like, oh, should I really be staying in your house knowing you can punch me this hard in front of strangers? I don't know. And then obviously when it was my turn, she just basically laughed at my very weak and pathetic attempt to punch. But also I didn't want to hurt anyone. As much as it's good to know how to take a punch, I don't want to learn how to punch people. That's not something I'm really interested in. So that was almost like the warm-up, and I thought, oh my gosh, we really have to do more? Isn't the punching enough? My stomach was really hurting at this point. I was like, oh my god, am I going to have to get checked for internal damage? No, I'm kidding, obviously, it was not that bad, but mostly because it's coming, it's not that bad, and you do tense up, but still, it was my first time being punched. I don't, like I say, I'm just like this average Brit from London who doesn't really get involved with anything like this before, so it was kind of weird to me. And the final exercise was similar to the punching one, except we had to be moving. So basically she had to just punch me across a room as hard as she could, and I had to just resist and just try to like not let it happen. And I genuinely got some bruises from that one, mostly because she kept punching me in the chest, which I'm sure is especially brutal. And when I texted someone about this story a couple of days later, they were like, yeah, that's quite dangerous. And I was like, yeah, it didn't feel right, but maybe she was just wanting to give my stomach a break. I don't know. Maybe she thought, let's throw her in the proper deep end. And obviously when it came to my turn, I think I barely moved her a couple of inches. She was a pretty resistant lady. I really admired her, to be honest. She had a lot of guts, a lot of gall going for these crazy exercises and really learning some interesting stuff. But yeah, maybe it's just not the kind of thing I would want to do when I'm staying with someone. It's the kind of thing I might go to a class with a friend and just give something new a try. But I think all the elements in one neat bundle, the house, the classes, I just was like, what is happening? Is this really what I'm going to be putting myself through for another 6 months? And honestly, I was so glad to be out of there, both the class and the house. And I didn't say no because part of me because I didn't want to feel bad for saying no, but also because I wanted to learn about myself, and I wanted to learn about what I expect and my standards of like cleanliness in this instance, or personal space maybe, and also just how to respond to really crazy situations. I think it was the first time on my travels that I was experiencing something so out of my comfort zone that I had to really consciously make an effort to make decisions. And I think it really helped me moving forward with making other decisions, not hard ones necessarily, but it sounds so silly, but after that I did things like skydiving, shark snorkeling, caving, ziplining, all of these crazy activities that I would just never do in the UK or at home. And I'm really dead proud of myself for having started with that tiny little Systema class and, you know, fast tracking my way to skydiving. It was, I wouldn't say the two are necessarily connected, but it was that starting to open out of my shell that really just triggered something in my head that was like, yeah, no, do you know what, I can do it. Even if it's not the most pleasant thing at the time, I'm going to be super glad for it, and I'm going to have so many great stories. And yeah, so that's the story about how my couchsurfing host punched me. So I told you it wasn't very as dramatic as it sounds, but yeah, I think while couchsurfing, self-defense, acrobatic classes aren't your usual maybe adventurous activities, they were out there for me, and like I say, they kicked off my adventures for the remainder of my time in New Zealand, like with a bit of a bang. Like I definitely continued, and all the people I would meet in the country from then on, I enjoyed telling them this story, and it was really fun thing to do. And I don't think it's put me off couchsurfing at all. I think the problem with couchsurfing is that you do feel quite obliged to hang out with your host because they are hosting you. And in fact, Jane even made a point to tell me, I do get annoyed with guests who decline the offer of hanging out with me or doing activities with me, which I totally get, because obviously you would hope maybe that would be a bit of reciprocation from them rather than just a free place to stay. But I don't think you should be annoyed if someone doesn't want to go and get punched by you. I think there's a bit of a line that can be crossed, but hey, I think that's her, that's them. People should be able to do whatever they want. Like if it's with someone and your host, then great. But yeah, I completely understand her point. Like it's important to try and embrace new things with your host, because she's probably just really excited to show you what she's excited about too. And obviously for me, I ended up with some pretty cool stories. Even though it wasn't fun at the time, I definitely can laugh about it now. As you can tell, like I think it's such a great story. I love freaking out my family and telling them that I got punched by my host. Obviously once I was safely home, then it was funny. At the time it was not so funny for them, but yeah, I think that you can be bolder and braver through tiny little steps, not necessarily something that has to be major and massive. You don't have to go straight in the deep end and go cliff jumping on your second day, but if you try like a random beach yoga class that's a little bit different for you, then you know you're building up those experiences, and you just become a more adventurous person. And yeah, that's my story. So I hope you enjoyed, and it'd be a good one to beat, I think, on my next couchsurfing experience. So maybe I'll be that nutty host who decides to take people to strange classes one day, but for now I'm happy being the guest, just going with the flow and following along. Thanks, bye!
Thank you for joining us on another audio adventure right here at Wandertale. Subscribe to our channel to stay tuned for more stories from around the world and share tales with the open-minded, the brave, and the curious.